Welcome back to Untold Revenge Files. Today, the story you're about to hear takes place in Savannah, Georgia, and involves $2.3 million in estate fraud and insurance forgery. A father who thought he could have his own daughter declared mentally incompetent, and the forensic audio analyst he should never have underestimated. My name is Nadia Soren, and this is how I used sound to expose my father, Richard Soren's 17-year-long lie. My own father stood up in a Chatham County courtroom, pointed at me with a manicured finger, and told Judge Miriam Hartwell that I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs, let alone my late grandmother's estate. His voice cracked on cue. His eyes glistened under the fluorescent panels. His hand trembled just enough to look involuntary. He called me delusional. He called me dangerous. He said I had been unstable since I was 14 years old, and that if the court didn't intervene, I would destroy everything our family had built. I didn't say a word. I sat at the respondent's table with my hands folded, watching his performance the way I'd been trained, listening not to what was being said, but to what the frequencies underneath were hiding. Then Judge Hartwell leaned forward, adjusted her steel-rimmed glasses, and asked my father's attorney one question. And everything changed. Richard's lawyer, a man named Philip Beaumont, Esquire, doubled down immediately. He shuffled his papers and insisted his client's concerns were rooted in medical documentation. My father nodded emphatically beside him, dabbing his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I still didn't speak. In my line of work, the first person to raise their voice is usually the one with the most to hide inside it. But before we continue, where are you joining from today? And let me ask you something personal. Has anyone in your family ever tried to use your past against you? Not because they were worried, but because they were afraid of what you knew? Now, let's go back to that sweltering courtroom in Savannah, Georgia, where the air conditioning fought a losing battle against the July humidity, and the oak-paneled walls smelled of lemon polish and old decisions. Chatham County Superior Court, courtroom 4B, second floor. The ceiling fans turned slowly above rows of dark wooden benches, and every creak of the floor seemed to carry a verdict of its own. Richard Soren arrived that morning dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, a lavender pocket square folded into 3 precise peaks. His silver hair was swept back, freshly cut. His second wife, Celeste, the accomplice, sat behind him in the gallery, wearing a cream Chanel blazer and pearls that probably came from my grandmother's jewelry box. He spoke in the measured baritone of a retired investment advisor, a man accustomed to boardrooms and country club luncheons, a man who believed that presentation was reality. He presented the court with my adolescent counseling records from when I was 14, records from the year he left my mother and me for Celeste, records from the darkest chapter of a child's life that he himself had authored. He stripped away every year of my professional achievement and held up only the wound. The gallery whispered. A woman in the second row shook her head slowly, eyes full of pity. I fixed my gaze on the single scratch in the oak table in front of me, a thin white line carved into the varnish like a scar. In my world, audio forensics teaches you one fundamental truth. The louder the noise, the weaker the signal. I'm 36 years old now, and I hold dual certifications in forensic audio analysis and digital signal processing from the International Association for Identification. But when I was 14, I was just a girl whose father walked out on Christmas Eve. He didn't leave a note. He left a silence, the kind that fills a house like gas, invisible and suffocating. My mother crumbled. She stopped eating. She stopped answering the phone. I missed 43 days of school that spring, and a guidance counselor flagged me for mandatory therapy. The record said, adjustment disorder with depressed mood. Richard Soren never attended a single session. He was too busy adjusting to Celeste's waterfront condo in Hilton Head. It was my grandmother, Lenora Soren, who saved me. She drove 4 hours from her home in Savannah the day she found out, packed my things into her Buick, and brought me to the house on Whitaker Street, a 3-story Victorian with a wraparound porch, heart pine floors, and a garden that smelled like magnolia and fresh basil. Estimated value, $1.4 million. She enrolled me in school. She fed me. She sat with me on the porch swing every evening and said the same thing. People lie with their mouths, Nadia, but sound never lies. Listen deeper. Lenora had been a music teacher for 40 years. She taught me to hear what others missed, the hesitation before a false note, the breath that betrays a rehearsed line. That instinct became my career. That house became my home. When Richard resurfaced 15 years later with Celeste on his arm and a sudden interest in Lenora's declining health, I noticed what no one else did. Not the words, the frequency, the rehearsed warmth, the practiced concern. But Richard and Celeste had no idea who they were really dealing with. The house on Whitaker Street was more than real estate. It was a living archive. Every room held Lenora's handwriting, her sheet music, her decades of teaching awards framed along the staircase. The garden she'd planted in 1987 still produced tomatoes every August. The piano in the parlor had been tuned by the same technician since 1994. I moved back in full-time when Lenora was diagnosed with vascular dementia at 81. I was 29. For 7 years, I managed her medications, her finances, her doctor's appointments. I bathed her when she couldn't remember how. I read to her from hymnals when the words on the page stopped making sense to her. I slept on a cot in her bedroom for the last 14 months of her life. Richard and Celeste visited exactly 9 times in 7 years. I counted. Each visit lasted between 45 minutes and 2 hours. Celeste arrived in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and departed before the perfume faded. They'd sit in the parlor, hold Lenora's hand for a photograph, post it to Facebook with a caption about family time and cherishing every moment, and leave before I finished making lunch. Once, Celeste asked if the house had been appraised recently. She asked it the way you ask about the weather, casually while checking her phone. They looked at Whitaker Street and saw $1.4 million in equity. I looked at it and saw the woman who saved my life. In Lenora's final months, she held my hand and whispered things that didn't always make sense. Fragments of hymns, names of students from the 1970s, grocery lists for dinners she'd cooked decades ago. But one evening, 3 weeks before she died, she looked at me with sudden, startling clarity and said, "Don't let him take the music out of this house, Nadia. He never could hear it." She passed on a Tuesday morning in April. The magnolias were blooming. I was holding her hand. 6 months after the funeral, I sat at Lenora's mahogany secretary desk, the one with the brass pulls and the hidden compartment she thought I didn't know about, reviewing the trust account statements. My pulse didn't race. It slowed. That's what training does. A withdrawal dated 11 months before her death, $96,400, routed to an account I didn't recognize. I spent 7 hours cross-referencing every transaction against the trust's original structure. The trail led to an LLC registered to Celeste's maiden name, which funneled directly to Richard's personal brokerage account. Total siphoned over 22 months, $347,000. The money had been bled out in irregular amounts designed to avoid automatic flags. $12,000 here, $8,700 there, $23,500 on a random Tuesday. It went to Richard's failing day trading habit and Celeste's credit card debt, $89,000 at Neiman Marcus alone. But the real hemorrhage was offshore. $1.8 million in a Cayman Islands account tied to a collapsed real estate syndicate Richard had organized with 3 other investors. The money was frozen. Creditors were circling. His Jaguar and the Hilton Head condo were weeks from seizure. That's why he'd gone after Lenora's trust. Desperate, sloppy, predictable. Then the property tax bill arrived. Richard had drained the escrow. 3 years unpaid. The house on Whitaker Street was 45 days from a tax lien. I opened my personal savings, transferred $41,200, and paid every cent. I didn't do it for Richard. I had just purchased the right to his destruction. I treated him the way I'd treat a corrupted audio file. Bad data I was forced to isolate before I could extract the truth. 2 weeks later, my supervisor at Meridian Forensic Group, Dr. Alan Cho, called me into the 7th floor conference room. The air conditioning was set too cold. HR sat in the corner, not making eye contact. An anonymous letter had arrived, alleging grave concerns about my psychological fitness. Attached, a photocopy of a guardianship petition filed by Richard, framed to suggest I was a liability to the firm. Dr. Cho used words like sensitive and precautionary and temporary reassignment. I wasn't fired. I was sidelined, removed from client cases, barred from expert witness testimony, locked out of the forensic analysis servers. 7 years of flawless casework made invisible by a single anonymous envelope. I sat in silence and listened to the frequency beneath his words. Fear of liability, nothing more. They didn't fire me. They freed me. Now I had time to hunt. My boyfriend of 2 years, Marcus Edelman, a tax attorney who should have known better, broke up with me at my kitchen table on a Thursday evening. He looked exhausted in a way that was performed. "Nadia, maybe your father has a point about the stress," he said. "Taking a psychological evaluation doesn't mean you're crazy. It just proves him wrong. I'm trying to be reasonable here." I studied his face the way I'd study a waveform, looking for the original signal beneath the distortion. Celeste had been calling him for 3 weeks. I'd seen her number in his recent calls. He never mentioned it. "You should go," I said. He left his key on the counter. I locked the door and didn't watch him walk to his car. Another liability offloaded from the balance sheet. Then came the social media campaign. Richard posted a photograph of himself standing on Lenora's porch at sunset, captioned, "Heartbroken watching my daughter spiral. If you've ever loved someone suffering from mental illness, you know this pain. Please keep our family in your prayers. Hashtag mental health awareness. Hashtag family first." Comments poured in. Prayers for the devoted father. Condemnation of the troubled daughter. People I'd known for years chimed in with sad face emojis. I didn't respond. I didn't engage. I deleted every notification. While he performed, I investigated. They thought they had destroyed me. Career sidelined, relationship severed, reputation shredded. They had no idea they'd given me exactly what I needed: time, focus, and motivation. I did what I do best, I audited them. My apartment became the war room. A second monitor from a pawn shop. Lenora's secretary desk dragged from storage. Legal pads stacked in columns. A French press that ran 20 hours a day. The kitchen table disappeared under expanding concentric rings of bank statements, court filings, and insurance records. I stopped thinking of Richard as my father. He became case file RS 4471. Emotional distance achieved. Professional mode fully engaged. I didn't waste time on anger. I applied the same methodology I'd used to authenticate recordings in federal fraud cases to the documents my own family had filed against me. I started with the guardianship petition. Every page, every paragraph, every signature. Richard's attorney had attached a durable power of attorney allegedly signed by Lenora, granting Richard full authority over her financial affairs. The document was dated March 14th of the prior year. I cross-referenced that date against Lenora's medical records from Candler Hospital. On March 14th, Lenora had been admitted for a urinary tract infection that triggered acute delirium. Her attending physician's notes read, "Patient non-responsive, unable to communicate or recognize family members. No capacity for legal decision-making." She couldn't have signed anything. I turned to the notary block. Commission number 7734891. Name, Dorothy Faye Hutchins. The name was vaguely familiar in the way a half-remembered song is, present but unplaceable. I ran the commission number through Georgia's Secretary of State database. Dorothy Faye Hutchins' commission had expired. I searched further. Obituary archives, Chatham County death records. 4 hours of methodical cross-referencing. Dorothy Faye Hutchins died on September 3rd, 2 years and 7 months before the power of attorney was allegedly notarized. Her obituary mentioned she had been a notary for Beaumont and Associates, Philip Beaumont's own firm. Richard had used a dead woman's credentials to forge the most important document in the case. Felony forgery, federal document fraud, identity theft of the deceased. The power of attorney was worthless. One lie is always a load-bearing wall for a larger structure. I kept digging. I followed the money backward through the estate account. Every premium payment, every automatic withdrawal. 2 months before Lenora died, a recurring charge appeared. $3,400 monthly to Commonwealth Mutual Life Insurance. I didn't recognize the policy. I called Commonwealth Mutual, identified myself as successor trustee, and requested the file. What arrived by encrypted email 3 days later made me set my coffee down and sit in silence for a full minute. Richard had taken out a $750,000 life insurance policy on Lenora, 8 weeks before she died. The application was submitted via a telehealth digital platform. The health declaration stated she was in excellent condition for her age. The consent forms bore her digital signature. I pulled Lenora's actual medical records from her final months. Diagnosis: advanced vascular dementia with secondary complications. She was bedridden. She was on round-the-clock pain medication. She couldn't hold a pen. She couldn't operate a telephone, let alone navigate a digital insurance portal. The signature was forged electronically. The health declaration was fabricated. The telehealth loophole was exploited deliberately. Insurance fraud, elder abuse, both felonies. I allowed myself 30 seconds of grief, a hot, compressed wave that rose from my chest and burned behind my eyes. Then I set it aside. They weren't just thieves. They were counting down a dying woman's days like a stock ticker, waiting for the payout. I expanded the investigation to Richard's offshore exposure. His collapsed Cayman Islands syndicate had moved $1.8 million through shell companies across 3 states before the accounts were frozen by Bahamian regulators. Wire transfers crossed from Georgia to Delaware to Nevada to Grand Cayman, each hop a federal crime. Money laundering, tax evasion, embezzlement from a fiduciary trust. The paper trail wasn't just incriminating, it was multi-jurisdictional. FBI territory, IRS Criminal Investigation Division. This was bigger than family court. I built the master evidence file. I named it the Dead Man's Switch. Fitting, given that a dead notary was holding up their entire scheme. Section 1. The forged power of attorney paired with Dorothy Hutchins' death certificate and Lenora's hospitalization records. Section 2. The fraudulent life insurance policy, cross-referenced with Lenora's actual medical condition and the impossibility of her digital consent. Section 3. The $347,000 trust embezzlement, tracked transaction by transaction with my own $41,200 tax payment as proof of the damage. Section 4. The offshore money laundering scheme, with wire transfer records, shell company registrations, and frozen account documentation. Section 5. A comprehensive timeline connecting every crime, every date, every dollar, a systematic map of exploitation. I encrypted every copy, cloud backup, physical duplicate in a safe deposit box at First Chatham Bank, a sealed copy with my attorney, Janet Okoro, with instructions to release it publicly if anything happened to me. I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Atlanta through an encrypted portal. An anonymous tip first, just enough to get their attention. Then a formal submission with my full credentials. Special Agent Dana Whitfield called me back within 48 hours. She'd seen my expert testimony in the Beauregard wire fraud case 2 years earlier. She trusted my methodology. I fed her everything: encrypted spreadsheets, document trails, timeline analysis. We synchronized with the court date. Federal agents would be present at the hearing. Warrants were prepared in advance. The night before the hearing, I reviewed the evidence one final time at Lenora's desk. I selected a charcoal suit and a pair of simple pearl earrings. Lenora's pearls, the real ones, not the ones Celeste had helped herself to. Richard was posting on Instagram, a sunset photograph with the caption, "Tomorrow we fight for what's right. #Justice for Family." His confidence was absolute. He was preparing a performance. I had already performed the autopsy. Justice doesn't need a microphone. It just needs a ledger. I slept soundly. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early, carrying only a single briefcase and the truth. I arrived at Chatham County Superior Court at 8:17 a.m., 43 minutes before the hearing. Charcoal suit, Lenora's pearl earrings, no makeup beyond what was already there. I carried a single leather briefcase and a tablet. The security guard recognized me from the Beauregard case and nodded. I nodded back. I took my seat at the respondent's table and opened my tablet to a blank screen. Richard arrived at 8:52, precisely timed for maximum visibility. Charcoal Tom Ford, lavender pocket square, the same costume as every performance. Celeste followed in a winter white St. John suit with gold buttons, her hand on his arm like she was stabilizing a monument. Behind them came Philip Beaumont, Esquire, 6'2", silver cufflinks, a burgundy silk tie, and the relaxed posture of a man who had never lost a case he considered beneath him. His briefcase was Italian leather, monogrammed. A cluster of family friends filled the first 2 rows of the gallery, recruited as witnesses to Richard's suffering. At the very back of the courtroom, 2 men in plain navy suits sat with their hands folded. They carried no briefcases. They had no visible files. They watched everything. Judge Miriam Hartwell entered at 9 sharp. Steel-rimmed glasses, silver hair pulled into a low knot, 22 years on the bench. She was known in Chatham County for 2 things, her patience and her intolerance for theater. Everyone rose. Beaumont opened with surgical condescension. He described me as a troubled woman with a documented history of psychological instability dating back to adolescence. He produced my counseling records from age 14, the adjustment disorder diagnosis, the missed school days, the therapist's notes about emotional dysregulation following parental abandonment. He read selected passages aloud. He requested full legal guardianship on the grounds that I posed a material risk to the estate and to herself. Then Richard took the stand. He was sworn in. He settled into the witness chair, adjusted his pocket square, and began. His voice trembled, practiced, calibrated, a frequency I recognized from 1,000 analyzed recordings. He reached back 22 years to my adolescence. He described finding me catatonic on my bedroom floor. A lie, he wasn't there. He described repeated calls from school counselors, calls my mother handled alone. He described a pattern of instability that he framed as genetic, inevitable, tragic. He stripped away my degrees, my certifications, my 7 years of federal casework, and held up only the 14-year-old girl he had abandoned on Christmas Eve. His voice rose. He stood up. He pointed at me. "She is incompetent." The word cracked against the high plaster ceiling and echoed off the wooden benches like a gunshot. Every head turned toward me. Pity in some eyes, judgment in others, curiosity in most. I didn't flinch. I didn't look up. I was focused on a scratch in the oak table, a thin white line in the varnish, like a frequency spike on a waveform. I counted 4 seconds of silence. The louder the noise, the weaker the signal. Judge Hartwell let him finish. She let Beaumont finish. She gave them every inch of rope in the spool. Then she leaned forward. Her glasses slid slightly down her nose. She looked at Beaumont, not Richard, not Celeste, not the gallery, just the attorney. "Counselor," she said, a pause that lasted 3 heartbeats. "Do you have any idea who you're suing today?" Beaumont blinked. The flicker was microscopic, a half-second loss of composure, recovered with a condescending smile. "She's an audio technician, Your Honor. Does some freelance work for local law enforcement, I believe." He glanced at his notes. "Sound editing, that sort of thing." I kept my face clinical, but somewhere deep in my chest, a door opened. Judge Hartwell removed her glasses. She looked at me, then at Richard, then back at Beaumont. "No, Counselor," she said. She let the word hang in the courtroom air like a sustained note. "Nadia Soren is a Senior Forensic Audio Analyst certified by the International Association for Identification. She holds dual specializations in voice authentication and digital signal forensics. She has provided expert testimony in 11 federal fraud cases in this circuit alone." Pause. "In fact, this very court contracted her firm during the Beauregard wire fraud prosecution." Another pause, longer this time. "She is the person we call when people try to make lies sound like the truth." The air left the room, complete vacuum silence. Richard's mouth opened, nothing came out. Celeste's gold buttons caught the light as her chest stopped moving. Beaumont's face drained from confident tan to institutional gray. In the back row, the two men in navy suits shifted forward an inch. I stood, slowly, not rushed, every movement calibrated. I spoke for the first time in the entire hearing. Your Honor, my voice was level, the frequency of a clean signal, no distortion, no noise floor. While Richard Soren was busy constructing a theatrical performance about my mental health, I was conducting a forensic audit of his financial activity. Pause. I have submitted a file to the clerk. I call it the dead man's switch. I approached the bench and handed the tablet to the clerk. Documents appeared on the courtroom's display screen. Inside this file, you will find the encrypted paper trail for $347,000 in systematic embezzlement from the Lenora Soren Family Trust, orchestrated by Richard Soren and Celeste Soren through an LLC registered under her maiden name, routed across 3 state lines. I displayed the wire transfer records, the shell company registrations, the transaction timeline. Richard gripped both armrests. Celeste's hand went to her pearls, Lenora's pearls. You will also find the durable power of attorney that my father used to claim authority over this estate. I placed the document beside a death certificate. It was notarized by Dorothy Faye Hutchins, whose commission belonged to your own attorney's firm, Mr. Beaumont. Ms. Hutchins has been deceased for 2 years and 7 months. This is felony forgery using a deceased person's credentials. A strangled sound escaped from Richard's throat. Beaumont half rose to object. Judge Hartwell silenced him with a single raised finger. And finally, I said, you will find a $750,000 life insurance policy that Richard Soren took out on his own mother 8 weeks before her death. The application claimed Lenora Soren was in excellent health. Her medical records from Candler Hospital confirm she was bedridden with advanced vascular dementia, unable to hold a pen, unable to operate a telephone, and under 24-hour palliative care. I displayed the policy beside the medical records, the dates aligned in parallel columns. The digital consent forms bear a signature that Lenora Soren was physically and cognitively incapable of producing. I turned and looked directly at Richard for the first time. This wasn't an inheritance dispute, Your Honor. It was a crime scene, and I've already performed the autopsy. Silence. The kind that has weight and temperature, cold, heavy, final. Judge Hartwell didn't reach for her gavel. She looked at the clerk. Note for the record. She looked at the back of the courtroom. The 2 men in navy suits stood. Based on the evidence presented before this court, I find the petition for guardianship not only unfounded, but malicious in its construction and fraudulent in its intent. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the evidence of financial exploitation, forgery, insurance fraud, and systematic elder abuse will be referred immediately to federal authorities for criminal prosecution. She looked at Beaumont. Counselor, your client is no longer the petitioner in a guardianship proceeding. He is now a person of interest in a multi-jurisdictional felony investigation. I suggest you advise him accordingly. Special Agent Dana Whitfield moved down the center aisle. Richard was taken into custody first. The handcuffs clicked with a sound I will never forget. A clean, precise frequency, no distortion. Celeste followed. Her St. John blazer rode up as her arms were pulled behind her. Her gold buttons caught the light one last time. Rights were read. They were led out through the side door. The gallery sat in stunned, absolute silence. I closed my tablet. I placed it in my briefcase. I nodded to Judge Hartwell, a single, respectful inclination of my head. I walked toward the exit without looking back. I did not watch the arrests. I did not pause for the whispers. Professional to the end. Outside, the Savannah heat hit me like a living thing, thick, fragrant, alive. Magnolia and asphalt. I stood on the courthouse steps and breathed for what felt like the first time in months. My phone rang. Meridian Forensic Group, Dr. Cho's direct line. I declined the call. Not yet. Instead, I called Janet Okoro. "It's over," I said. "We won." I walked to my car. I drove down Whitaker Street past Lenora's house. The magnolias were blooming again. I could almost hear her on the porch swing. "Listen deeper, Nadia." The courthouse shrank in my rearview mirror until it disappeared. Then it was just the road and the quiet and the sound of something finally resolved. Richard Soren was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison for forgery, insurance fraud, and elder financial abuse. Celeste received 6 years for embezzlement and conspiracy. Philip Beaumont was disbarred. The life insurance policy was voided. The $1.8 million in offshore accounts was frozen for federal restitution proceedings. I sold the house on Whitaker Street, not because I wanted to, but because Lenora would have wanted me to build something bigger than walls. I used the reclaimed estate funds to establish the Lenora Soren Foundation, a legal defense fund providing free forensic financial analysis to elderly victims of family exploitation. I've learned that some people spend their whole lives trying to win through volume. They believe that if they scream loud enough or perform convincingly enough, they can overwrite the truth. They're wrong. Justice doesn't need a microphone. It just needs a clean recording. If you're standing alone right now against someone who's trying to use your past to erase your future, if they're calling you unstable because you see what they're hiding, remember this. Your silence is not your weakness. It is your frequency. It's the quiet room where you gather your evidence, where you analyze the signal, and where you wait for the people who think they're winning to reveal the distortion in their own voices. You are not alone, and you are far more powerful than the noise they make. If this story reminded you that your truth matters more than their volume, hit the like button and subscribe. Share this with one person who needs the strength to stand still today. Your life isn't a performance for them. It's a waveform, and you are the only one who gets to authenticate the signal.